Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are taking an updated and very in-depth look at the GeForce RTX 3080 Ti and Radeon RX 6800 XT. Now, there are a few reasons why I'm doing this. One being that despite their significantly different MSRPs, they're actually fairly similar in terms of pricing, at least here in Australia, where you can purchase the 3080 Ti for $2,500 Australian and the 6800 XT for $2,100, about what we were paying for an RTX 2080 Ti in late 2018. Both prices are disgustingly high, but that has been the theme for 2021, and it doesn't really look like changing anytime soon. It's also well out of our control, certainly out of my control. And while I don't recommend purchasing a gaming graphics card right now if you can help it, many of you are, and many more of you are sick of waiting. And the truth is, I have no idea when the situation will improve, nor does anyone else. It's really kind of crystal ball stuff. So if you're tossing up between an overpriced 3080 Ti and 6800 XT, this video should be helpful. Also, it does give us a chance to look at another board partner version of a 3080 Ti, and this one comes from a company that we've had a lot of good experiences with in the past, but haven't checked out anything new for quite some time, and that company is Gainward. On hand is their brand new RTX 3080 Ti Phantom GS, which is short for Gold Sample, and this is a beastly looking model with triple 8-pin PCIe power inputs, a huge triple slot, triple fan cooler, and then all the essentials like dual BIOS support. So, we'll take a closer look at how that model performs towards the end of the video. Now, for all of this testing, I used our AMD Ryzen 9 5950X test system with 32GB of DDR4 3200 CL14 dual rank dual channel memory. Both GPUs were tested at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, though I won't focus too much on the 1080p results, they've just been added for those who are interested in the numbers. Now, of the 30 games tested, we're only going to take a close look at the results for about a dozen of them, and then we'll take a quick look at how these two GPUs compare head-to-head across all of the games tested in a single graph. But please note, for those of you who are Floatplane and Patreon members, all graphs will be made available to you. Okay, let's get into it. Kicking things off, we have Borderlands 3, and here we're looking at very competitive performance between the 3080 Ti and 6800 XT. In fact, we're basically looking at identical performance at 1440p and 4K. Moving on to Total War Warhammer 2, and the results here are a bit all over the place. The 6800 XT does do quite well at 1080p, offering a mild 5% performance increase, and although it maintains slightly stronger 1% low performance at 1440p, the average frame rate did fall behind the 3080 Ti by a 9% margin. Then at 4K, the 6800 XT falls well behind the GeForce GPU, now trailing by a rather substantial 26% margin. Moving on to Death Stranding, and again the 6800 XT does well at 1080p and even delivers slightly better 1% low performance at 1440p, though the average frame rate ended up being much the same. Then we see at 4K that the 3080 Ti does pull ahead once again, though this time only by an 8% margin, so overall performance was fairly similar. Forza Horizon 4 is still a very strong title for AMD, and here the 6800 XT led at 1080p and at 1440p, while the 3080 Ti did nudge ahead at 4K by a mere 5% margin, so overall performance between these two GPUs was much of a muchness. Moving on to the Days Gone testing, we see that this is a very strong title for Nvidia, as here the 3080 Ti enjoyed a 25% performance advantage at 1440p and an even greater 33% advantage at 4K. It's worth noting that the 1% low data was much closer, but this could very well be CPU related and not necessarily an issue with the GeForce GPU. Now F1 2020 enables ray tracing by default on hardware that supports it, so I've left it enabled here. This does seem to favour the RTX 3080 Ti, and although the 6800 XT was still very good at 1440p, the GeForce GPU was much faster, offering 25% greater performance and then 30% more at 4K. And then we have Metro Exodus Enhanced, and this is another ray tracing title, and in fact ray tracing support is actually required to run the game, so you can't disable ray tracing here, and I've gone with the normal setting for testing. This handed the 3080 Ti its biggest win yet, delivering 58% more frames at 1440p and an incredible 82% more at 4K. And worse still for AMD, while the 6800 XT did deliver a perfectly enjoyable experience at 1440p at 74 FPS on average is more than enough to enjoy Metro Exodus, the 35 FPS seen at 4K was horrible, and you'd really have to play with the ray tracing effects completely disabled in order to receive an acceptable gaming experience, and that means playing the original version of the game. Moving on to Red Dead Redemption 2, and here we're once again looking at very competitive results between these two GPUs. The 3080 Ti was just 8% faster at 1440p, though the margin did blow out to 17% at 4K, and this is something we've come to expect. Basically, Nvidia's Ampere architecture is best utilised at high resolutions. Now, as I noted in the 6600 XT versus RTX 3060 comparison, I've included Counter-Strike Global Offensive simply because it's always heavily requested, despite the fact that it runs on a potato and is essentially a CPU benchmark at this point. But given we have 29 other titles to help balance out the results, I'm happy enough to include some other highly popular titles like Global Potato, even if you don't need this level of GPU power to run it. Apex Legends is another popular shooter, and this one does require a decent level of GPU power for high refresh rate gaming at 1440p and above. The RTX 3080 Ti offered 20% more frames at 1440p, which is a serious performance increase, and then 25% more at 4K. And this will be huge for those of you playing on premium 4K 144Hz panels. And the second last game that we're going to look at is Outriders, and here Nvidia has a reasonable performance advantage, delivering 15% more FPS at 1440p and 23% more at 4K, where crucially it managed to keep the frame rate above 60 FPS. And finally, we have Cyberpunk 2077, and here the 3080 Ti was 14% faster at 1440p and 24% faster at 4K. Obviously that 4K margin is quite significant, but I've got to say I was expecting the 3080 Ti to do a little better at 1440p, at least given the MSRP, which admittedly means very little right now, but still the 3080 Ti is meant to cost 85% more. So, as expected, the GeForce RTX 3080 Ti was the faster of the two, and it can be much faster with ray tracing enabled. Also, for those of you gaming at 4K, the GeForce GPU did appear to be the more obvious choice. But before we draw too many high conclusions, let's take a look at the results across all 30 games tested. For those of you gaming at 1440p, the Radeon RX 6800 XT might offer more value, and we'll look at cost per frame in a moment. But the point is, at 1440p, for the most part the 3080 Ti wasn't a great deal faster, and as a result ended up delivering 11% more performance on average. For those of you wondering, if we remove the blowout ray tracing results in Metro Exodus Enhanced, the 3080 Ti would be 9% faster on average. The only games that favoured the 6800 XT included Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and then Forza Horizon 4 and Borderlands 3 by very slim margins, so basically not worth talking about. On that note, it's probably worth mentioning that for a little over half the games tested, we saw single-digit performance margins, so I think it's fair to say for the most part there really isn't that much in it. However, if you're planning on gaming at 4K, the results will change quite considerably, and at least from a performance standpoint, the 3080 Ti becomes the much more obvious choice. On average, the GeForce GPU was 20% faster, and that is quite a significant difference, but of course pricing will determine if it's worth buying over the 6800 XT, so let's take a look at that now. Starting with the 1440p data, for fellow Australians, the 6800 XT ends up costing 8% less per frame, so overall it is the better value option, depending on how much value you place on stuff like DLSS support and the more mature ray tracing. And it's a very similar story for those of you buying from eBay.com over in the US. Based on typical sale prices, the 6800 XT ends up costing around 9% less per frame. So not a huge difference there, and given the small difference in price with both so heavily inflated, it'll probably come down to which features you prefer. Then looking at a major retailer such as Newegg, the RTX 3080 Ti becomes the more obvious choice given the extra features and the fact that right now it's offering you more bang for your buck. So yeah, that's an easy one. Now, for those of you buying one of these high-end GPUs for 4K gaming, the choice becomes far more obvious. Here in Australia, the RTX 3080 Ti ends up costing just 2% more, and we see the same thing at eBay over in the US. So given that, you'd probably feel that paying the small premium for the GeForce GPU is worth it for the on average 20% greater 4K performance, the superior ray tracing support, and of course DLSS. And then at Newegg.com, the 6800 XT ends up costing much more per frame, so again, an easy choice there. Now it's time to look at how the Gainward RTX 3080 Ti Phantom GS performs, and please note all previous data was based on the Nvidia reference spec, and the same applies for the AMD results, so no factory overclocking there. The Phantom GS is a factory overclocked model, and on average it clocked at 1845 MHz, and that's a mere 4% higher than the FE model, which clocked at 1770 MHz. This is a pretty typical factory OC. For example, the Asus TUF Gaming clocked at 1830 MHz under the same test conditions. The MSI 3080 Ti Supreme X sustained 1875 MHz, and the Asus ROG Strix LCOC managed 1920 MHz. That is a liquid-cooled model, so that explains the slightly higher boost frequency there. So in terms of performance, you really are looking at Founders Edition-like FPS, so there's really no point going over the gaming data. But what we can take a closer look at is the temperature results. And in our enclosed test system build, which uses the Corsair Obsidian 5000D in a 21 degree room, the Phantom Gaming GS peaked at 74 degrees with a 2100 RPM fan speed, and that's only a few degrees better than the Nvidia FE model. So honestly, not a great result given the Asus TUF Gaming peaked at just 64 degrees and was slightly quieter. Still, it's certainly not a bad result, and if the Phantom GS is all you have available, then it's certainly worth considering. Given the MSRP, you might not have expected to see a direct comparison between the GeForce RTX 3080 Ti and Radeon RX 6800 XT. Probably, given the MSRP, 6900 XT would be a much better matchup there, but as we've just seen, in reality, there's really not much difference in price. At MSRP, the 6800 XT is the obvious choice for me. It's just way better value than the RTX 3080 Ti, and the current level of ray tracing support and quality simply doesn't justify the 85% price premium at MSRP, nor does features such as DLSS or any other features that Nvidia offers. However, if all GPUs were available at MSRP, the 3080 Ti would be about the dumbest purchase you could make, way dumber than even the RTX 3090 and 6900 XT. And not only that, but the RTX 3080, so the non-Ti model, would present as the best value high-end GPU, roughly matching the performance of the 6800 XT while offering all those extra features such as better ray tracing support and of course DLSS. So in a normal market, I'd be getting the RTX 3080. But of course, it's been years now since we've seen MSRP pricing, so we're going to let go of that for now and focus on the reality that's in front of us. As it stands, here in Australia, the RTX 3080 Ti costs just 9% more than the 3080, and on average, it's 7 to 9% faster depending on the resolution used for testing. And of course, you do get a 20% increase in VRAM. So, in the current market, the 3080 Ti actually makes more sense than both the RTX 3080 and 6800 XT. Kind of bizarre really, but that's just the way it is. It's probably also worth noting that you're looking at having to pay around 50% more in the current market for an RTX 3090, so at least some things have remained the same. That is still a super dumb product for gamers. Then, as good as AMD's RDNA 2 generation is, parts like the Radeon RX 6800 XT really need to be offered at a reasonable discount relative to their nearest competitor, given they lack the same level of ray tracing performance, and FSR is still yet to be widely adopted. And it's probably worth noting that in its current form, it isn't quite as good as DLSS, though that probably applies more to lower-end products targeting the 1080p resolution. So there you have it. In a normal market, I'd purchase the GeForce RTX 3080, and in the current market, I'd shield my eyes from the price and just click Add to Cart and snap up an RTX 3080 Ti. And that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And if you'd like to get more involved with the Hardware Unboxed channel and get some pretty cool perks in return, Floatplane, Patreon, the links for those are in the video description. Certainly worth checking out. You will get access to a lot more behind the scenes content. We do exclusive live streams for Floatplane and Patreon members each month. Tim and myself get together and do that. We also have a Discord chat where Tim and myself are active. Tim's always talking about monitors and stuff there, and I'm just talking about whatever you guys ask me. Yeah, behind the scenes content, I think I mentioned that, and Q&As. So yeah, some pretty cool stuff there. If you're interested, as I said, links from the video description. If not, that is perfectly fine, and I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.